Wealth inequality is easy to miss if you only look at paychecks. Two people can earn similar money this year and still live in completely different worlds if one owns a house, has stock, and can absorb a surprise expense, while the other is one emergency away from debt. That is why wealth is such a powerful kind of inequality. It is not just what comes in each month. It is the buffer. It is the cushion. It is the thing that lets some families survive a bad year without falling apart. And globally, the gap is huge. The World Inequality Report 2026 says the top 10% own about 3/4 of global wealth. The top 1% control about 37%. And the bottom half own about 2%. So when we talk about wealth inequality, we are not talking about a small tilt. We are talking about a system where ownership is stacked sharply toward the top. Wealth grows most reliably through assets that can rise in value over time. Housing is the clearest example for many middle-class families. In the U.S., the Federal Reserve says homeownership was 66.1% in 2022, and the median net housing value for homeowners reached about $200,000. That matters because housing is not just shelter. For many families, it is the main asset they ever build. When house values rise, owners gain equity. When they pay down a mortgage, they gain equity again. That is how wealth starts to snowball. OECD research pushes the same point in a more technical way. It finds that wealth inequality is driven mainly by financial assets and moderated by housing wealth. In other words, stock ownership and business ownership usually pull the top faster. But housing can lift the middle if people already own it. The point is simple. The same asset logic that builds a nest egg for some households widens the gap for everyone who starts without one. Wealth inequality gets sticky because wealth does not just sit still. It moves through families. The OECD found that 1 in 3 households has received some gift or bequest, and that share is much larger among high-income and high-wealth households. That is the quiet part of the story most people never see. Some families are not starting from zero because money is being passed forward, sometimes in very large chunks, from one generation to the next. Debt makes the stickiness worse. If a household is carrying credit card balances, a costly mortgage, or no emergency savings, then one bad month can erase progress that took years to build. OECD work on financial insecurity says lower-income households often lack the savings cushion to absorb a shock. The result is a loop. Assets create more assets. Inheritance reinforces assets. And debt keeps households from catching up. The danger of wealth inequality is not only that some people have more. It is that the rest of the system starts to behave differently around them. A household with wealth can borrow more cheaply, buy in better neighborhoods, ride out unemployment, and hand advantages to children. A household without wealth gets the opposite experience. One late bill matters more. One rent jump matters more. One medical expense matters more. The whole life becomes more fragile. The Federal Reserve's 2022 survey showed just how wide the U.S. gap still is. The typical white family had about 6 times as much wealth as the typical black family, and about 5 times as much as the typical Hispanic family. Even after gains across many groups, the distribution remained deeply unequal. And there is a broader social cost too. OECD and IMF materials both tie inequality to weaker mobility and weaker social resilience. When wealth is too concentrated, the economy becomes less forgiving. There is no single switch that turns wealth inequality off. But there are policies that move it. The IMF says taxing actual returns is generally less distortive and more equitable than a pure wealth tax. It also says reform should focus on capital income taxes, especially capital gains, and on closing loopholes. And if the goal is to address dynastic wealth, inheritance taxation matters. That is only part of the answer. OECD and IMF materials both point toward broader asset building too, stronger social insurance, better access to housing, and public systems that keep a temporary setback from becoming a permanent one. A household that can save, own, and recover is less likely to be trapped at the bottom forever. Housing policy matters here as well. If rising house prices only enrich the people who already own, the gap widens. If housing supply is too tight, new buyers get locked out. If housing is made more accessible, the middle can actually build wealth instead of watching it pull away. So the real solutions are a package, not a slogan. Fairer taxation of wealth at the point where it grows, better rules for inherited wealth, and broader access to the assets that create stability in the first place. Wealth inequality can feel natural because it is so familiar. But it is not a law of physics. It is the result of rules, institutions, and choices that decide who can own, who can borrow, who can inherit, and who gets left exposed. The easiest mistake is to think the answer is either do nothing or promise perfect equality. Neither is serious. The serious answer is to make wealth building broader, make tax rules less tilted toward accumulated capital, and make life less brittle for everyone who is still trying to get a foothold. That is the real argument. Not whether wealth exists. Wealth will exist. The question is whether the ladder into it is wide enough that a society can still call itself fair.